Welcome everybody. Welcome to Everyday Conversations regarding mental health. Now you're here because there's nothing on the telly. And I'm coming to you live from the old Heale Manor. And I'm your host, Lord Heale. So I've got a guest in tonight. Going to be interesting, this chat. So, you know what this channel's all about? It's all about mental well-being, mental health, taking the stigma out of it. Now, tonight, we're going to have a little chat about coping with PTSD. Now, without too much further ado, I'm going to bring my guest in and we'll have a conversation around his experience. So, without too much further ado, let's drag him in. Welcome, Ed.
Good morning, my time. Good evening, your time.
It is. So, Ed, now, you've got an interesting little story. I mean, you're a veteran of the Vietnam War. Now, Vietnam was a pretty bloody affair by any stretch of the imagination. And at the time, it didn't go down particularly well with an awful lot of Americans. But you was out there for a little while, and if you can tell us a little bit about your experience over there, and then we'll have a chat about how you've coped with it and stuff like that. So the square is yours.
Thank you. Well, it's good being with you and your listeners. I had completed time at Boston University and got my degree, which then during that time I had attended ROTC, which was Reserved Officer Training. That enabled me to start as an officer and enabled me to spend time in Germany for 2 years and then ultimately assigned to Vietnam. The interesting thing is, I didn't know I was going to be assigned to Vietnam because my tour in Germany looked like it was going to continue. But they drew down and I had to go. The point that you made, it was not a popular war, and you can try to deduct some of the reasons, but most of it was around the people that could be drafted. And so the draft set up a situation that no one in draft age really wanted to go serve, except for a few of the dedicated folks that thought it was their duty to serve. At that time, Canada's population grew a little as Americans snuck across the border into Canada and to avoid being drafted. I was drafted initially while I was in university, but by serving in ROTC, I had the mindset to go. As we were sitting in Seattle waiting for the plane to go to Vietnam, we were in a local bar and the song was called Run Through the Jungle. It was popular in those days. And the three officers I was sitting with looked at each other and we said, "Oh God, we are going to do this." So I can tell you there was trepidation, there was insecurity, and above all, we didn't know exactly how it would come out. My assignment was what we called MACV, Military Assistance Command Vietnam. So we were aiding directly the Vietnamese and the other countries servicing in that area. This was 1970. So people think we were moved out. We were not. There were still a lot of us there. And we went through a number of experiences. I was asked, have I had any mental challenges since? And I'll touch on how I think I helped avoid that. But I was not face to face combat like an infantryman. I was in helicopters most of the time. I obviously got shot at a lot of times. There was one night I was sitting, we lived in tents. I was sitting on a barrel which had two boards across it, which was our bathroom, and you could hear the mortar rounds coming toward where I was sitting. And at that point, I reached up and said, "Oh God, just don't take me here. Take me somewhere, but don't take me on top of this toilet." Luckily, they stopped just short of the area of all the toilets, and the toilets were burned the next morning, and I said a little prayer. Keep in mind that you either have faith or you're not sure, but when you think you're in danger, you tend to look for faith. And I think I have enough that it reassured me during that time. The challenges when we were attacked, I have I actually have a piece of shrapnel that I'll try to get to in a few minutes. That one night we heard a huge explosion. I jumped out of bed. Immediately thereafter, the shrapnel came through the tent on my pillow and was red hot and burned through the bed. So I can assure you that if I was still in bed, it would have hit me. We then, of course, moved into the trenches around the unit we were in. I had the fortune or disfortune of traveling around Military Region 2 and getting to know a lot of people who were not Americans, but the Vietnamese, the Koreans, and I got to understand different cultures and appreciate them. I certainly fell asleep on the floor, woke up in Pleiku, pulled in for transportation as I was waiting for my helicopter to get out. I don't really like to go into a detailed discussion about Vietnam, about specifics, unless I'm talking to another Vietnamese veteran who can really relate and understand what we're talking about. When I came out of Vietnam, I was just glad that I'd gotten to San Francisco. I had won a Bronze Star and an Army Commendation Medal, and so I was proud of that. And I wore my medals on my uniform, and I was going back to Boston, where my home was. And people looked at me with anything from disgust to just plain, you know, no thanks, no recognition, no support. And that had a traumatic moment in my life, so that I never hung up my awards or really did anything but put it all in the closet until the Iraq War. Now, people tend to want to know what PSD does, and I have been involved with that obviously during the Vietnam War. And I have, in a later responsibility that we'll go into, when I worked for Marriott for 22 years, gotten involved with people there often. The Army gave me the experience, and when I came out, I knew I needed some help. And so I did go to a psychiatrist who was at one of the clinics, who actually didn't charge me the normal costs. And he and I talked extensively about what I had gone through, and we shed tears and talked about the people and the friends I lost. And he described me as, you know, I called myself German. I was of German descent. He described me as a person who, my style, not my nationality, uh, takes things and puts them on a shelf and tries not to face them. And when you do that, that just continues to pull on you, whatever the crisis is or whatever the difficulty is. And he said, we've got to unpack all those shelves that has anything to do with your time in Vietnam. And there were things like writing letters home for our troops. There are plenty of stories that were involved in that I remembered. And I continue to remember two significant songs, the one I've already talked about, that when I hear them or heard them when I was younger, it would always trigger my memories in Vietnam. My sessions with Dr. Lippincott were extremely important. They were helpful, and I felt like I was coming in to work on a shelf, so I had a purpose when I came into the office, and we'd sit and talk, and he'd say, okay, well, let's close up this chapter and we'll start working on the next. And we went through that. And when it comes to Vietnam, I think that my base faith, as well as my openness to go see a psychiatrist, and this, quite frankly, was about 4 years after I came back, uh, opened me up and kind of put away those ghosts that were up on the shelf. And we've got it, that shelf is clear, clean, tidy. And I know where the bad stories are, and I know how I dealt with them. And that really made a difference in my life. That's not to say I don't have sympathy for the people that face PSD. And staying on the soldiers' side, especially individuals that were hand to hand combat, are the ones that often had real serious cases, those that were injured, and those people that just couldn't walk away from the situation as much as I could and was fortunate in that case. I would transition because that experience gave me a lot of experience that I then used in my business, which we'll talk about in a second. But I want to make sure Tim has me on target or has any questions he may want to ask.
Well, thanks, Ed. That's amazing. So, from your experience then in Vietnam, and then coming out and having that those sessions of therapy, do you think that catching it at a fairly early stage is beneficial to having it bottled up for years?
Well, easy answer, yes. And we know that police in the US, I won't speak for Britain, the police in the US that get involved in a conflict often have PSD too. It's
Mm,
not just limited to full time war. Uh, I have a good friend who was in the LAPD. She uh, served 5 years, and in the fifth year, got in the middle of a gunfight that was just one of those things. She came out of it and she said, "Why am I doing this? Why do I want to put myself in the middle of this?" But had to really settle herself. And so she went through uh, a discussion. That's not a discussion with a friend, that's a discussion with a professional, like I described, who
mm,
can really help you uh, deal with the issue and, like yourself, ask the right questions at the right time. And that's not your best friend. They get involved emotionally. And again, as I said, you will not find somebody open up except for the funny stories
mm.
about Vietnam when you're out having drinks one night. It's just not something you do unless you know the person's a veteran. And then the two of you walk over in a corner and have your own discussion. And
Mm. Yeah,
because you've found a brother or sister, we had ladies over there too.
yeah. I mean, your experience of coming back and traveling across America back to your home, and the way that people were looking at you, the way that people treated you, how did that kind of make you feel?
It probably was the most significant impact that had nothing to do with day to day war or action that I could have put on the cake. I mean, it was to me, I just didn't know what the hell was going on because we were reading in Vietnam Stars and Stripes. We weren't getting a true picture of how deeply the country had divided itself on the issue. And
Mm,
we thought that we had done what we were told, and we didn't have a political bone in our body. But we did have in Vietnam conflicts between race going on, and that made it a little more uncomfortable. But at least we could deal with that within the areas we were in. But when I
mm,
got on that plane and I'm walking back to coach and people looked up at me, I it was amazing walking through the terminal. So I think that was significant. And obviously, the American system has changed that in since Iraq to
mm.
say these guys are doing their job, they're looking out for us, and that was the first time I put my medals on the wall because I
Yeah,
started. So it's part of the story, but it's not the whole story.
yeah. I mean, things have changed so much in America since from the Iraq War and from the conflict in Afghanistan. The attitude towards veterans, as I understand it now in America, is so much better, and everybody thanks you for your service, and the Veterans Administration over there, the VA, they have gone an awful long way to helping lots and lots of guys out. That's not to say that people slip through the net and stuff like that, but the attitude nowadays, has that correlated for the Vietnam vets as well? Are they now respected a little bit more, along with the Afghan and the Iraq vets?
Time has a lot to do with that. Most of the people I see on planes and going places were not that familiar with the Vietnam War. What they learned was in the school books, and it wasn't that positive. They
Mm,
they were thinking about the shootings on a university campus. They have visuals, and so their attitude is somewhat jaded, but they have gotten involved in thanking anybody who served in the military,
yeah,
and uh, so uh, that transition, I believe, has been better for us and has helped. But PSD is a disease. It's medical. It is
yeah,
not thing that is fake or, you know,
mm,
people that go through this, and I had lots of experience in my job in the same situation. But these people are everyday people now. You hear about a shooting in a school, uh, you traumatize the whole family. It's
yeah,
not limited to military. And it goes back to what you said. I think the sooner you get help, the better off you are. And the
yeah,
quality of help makes a difference. So I'm sitting here remembering the doctor's name with no problem because he played such a key role. And I didn't see him for over a year. I saw him for a relatively short time.
mm,
And he said to me one day, "Okay, we've got everything up on the shelf and it's tidy. So have a nice day and let me know if you need me." So, um, getting help early and not being afraid of that. Um, I mean, I saw my combat environment. I wasn't shooting in an infantry unit, but I was in the middle of mortars on a regular basis.
getting a little
And
thing coming does sharpen your senses up a fraction.
it keeps you focused. So, but uh,
Certainly
the
does.
the fact of the matter is that was always there for you. That's what a policeman goes through, or a
Yeah,
policewoman, every day, because
mm.
they are out there not knowing what's going to happen.
They don't know
And
who the
so,
enemy is, and that's I mean that's another problem with recent wars. I mean the Korean War, you knew who your enemy was. The Vietnam War, the Iraq wars, or the early Iraq War, the first Gulf War, you knew who the enemy was. When it comes to conflicts like Afghanistan and Iraq, where you're not, where you don't know who your enemy is, that becomes a little bit more problematic.
really,
So insurgent wars are a lot more difficult to cope with, because you just don't know where it's going to come from. But just looking back at PTSD, it can be at any age, and quite often you get young people or people that have had a childhood trauma of some sort that tend to carry it for all their life. Some people, it really is a devastating thing, and because it's never been dealt with. My experiences in Afghanistan, we had a system called TRIM, which is Trauma Incident Management. And the way that works is that there's been an incident, say a bomb blast where people have lost their lives and lost limbs. And what they do is they go in 72 hours after that incident. They look at everybody that's been involved in that incident, whether directly involved or indirectly involved, and a team goes in and they assess everybody to see who needs what sort of treatment, whether somebody wants a one-to-one, whether somebody wants referring straight on, whether it just wants a small group to talk about it, or whether it's just an overall brief. And that's done at the 72-hour point. Then the team will make notes and they'll go back in at the 30-day point, reassess everybody that they've done, see if anybody's how people are coping, whether things have changed, whether people are still struggling, and at any time they can signpost them onto professional help. And then they go in for a final wash up at the 3 month point and reassess everybody to see how they're doing. And that generally helps most people through those traumatic incidents.
And I think that's great. And obviously, we did not have that in my
No,
day. The other factor being we had a draft, not a professional army. And so a lot of people had not even anticipated through their basic training what they were going to run into.
yeah,
And though we trained well, um, you couldn't, as we were talking, really anticipate what was going to hit you next. In my in my training as an officer, we were patrolling down a road, and I was technically in charge. This was other officers, and hell, all of a sudden, a tank comes right out of the woods and turns the thing at us, and all I could think of was scatter because Americans tend to stay too close to each other in a battle environment. So,
yeah,
uh, in real life, I would have been holding the bullet from the tank. So, um, and so I can smile at those instances because I didn't have to lose a friend or see the
yeah,
actual negative. And that's what war shows don't do for kids, um,
yeah,
and some of the violence. But I think the good news is, and you described it in trim, if you get to help, and there's always a stigma about mental health
yeah.
help
And
because
that's
uh,
what we're trying to do. We're trying to take that stigma out of it, and we're trying to let people know that it is okay to not be okay. It is okay to have these feelings. It's not unusual to have the sort of feelings where you need some help. So from that point of view, it's really important that we try and push this thing out that it's okay for people to have these problems and to talk about it and to get help for it. And it's nothing to be ashamed of.
so one of the things that I keep on my desk,
Whoa.
which
that,
was
that, that's a piece of
changed,
shrapnel and a half, that is.
but it is a good luck charm to me, and so I consider this very important, and it's been on my desk through 40 years with Marriott and 10 more years with a company you don't have in Britain, but called Orange County Visitors Association. It's always been with me.
Mm,
Those things help,
yeah.
but the professionals are the ones that really understand what can help and can't.
So Ed, let's move things up a bit. You've been quite busy in recent times of doing some writing, and
Well,
you've knocked up
yeah,
a couple of books from your experiences.
The I worked for Marriott, which I know is known in Britain because I helped open those hotels. Um, and I was president of our international division. So we literally, during my 22-year tour in that job, opened 550 hotels, brand new in 73 countries. Well, I learned a lot in the military about people, whether it was Captain Yi from the South Koreans or anybody from the Vietnamese units. But I learned the differences and I really enjoyed that aspect. So I had always wanted to go be head of the international division of Marriott, which at the time I took over had 12 hotels. So that was the best assignment I could have. We discovered in the first 6 months of my job that we did not have a crisis plan. And we discovered that we had crises. And with the crisis, usually there was stress on the people involved. So, what am I talking about? Bombings. You've seen pictures in movies of our hotel being blown up in Pakistan. I
Mm,
was there the next day. We had hotels blown up in Indonesia. We were involved in kidnappings. We were involved. I was standing in Israel when we finally got our CFO back from our Beirut hotel after 30 days of negotiation with Hezbollah. We were involved with any number of fires. We were involved and really involved deeply with the tsunami that hit Thailand and a
mm,
lot of our hotels. So, those I understood that we needed to get help for the people like your unit, which I think so cool. And we hired a company that would go in and sit with the people that we had involved in the situation, whatever it may be. And I would tell you that in 22 years, we went through um, government takeovers, we went through efforts to take over in Thailand, and particularly, they captured three of our hotels and they allowed me to go in to just meet with the staff that was there to reassure them. I learned that the responsibility of leadership was to reassure and let your people see you in front and to be there. And that made a lot of difference when you consider that I was in Egypt during Mubarak's um removal because we had 7 hotels and 4,000 employees in Egypt. And we were a target in Cairo. And I was stuck over in Tbilisi, not Tbilisi, excuse me, that's Georgia. I was stuck over in one of our smaller hotels on the Red Sea. And when I got back to Cairo, uh, the staff was kind of circled over in a big circle, and the Egyptian military had finally come to encircle the hotel to protect it. We had at that time 1,200 rooms, and we had filled 600 rooms during this engagement that was going on around us. And I walked up to the uh, acting GM because their general manager was having open heart surgery in Boston. And these gentlemen were all Egyptian. They had grown up within the Marriott system. And I said, what's happening? They said, well, when the Minister of Interior took the political police away from the hotel, who were the only ones that had guns, and they were protecting the entrances, immediately the crowd started coming in here, and we held the gate. But we were going to lose, and it was evident. So the executive chef said, I have a solution. And he brought out all the culinarians with their
Knives,
whatever knives,
cleavers, meat cleavers.
and forks, whatever. Uh, and they stood behind our security team. Out came the front desk, out with their pens or whatever. Out came the housekeepers. Out came the engineers who had really good heavy stuff. And the people just stopped because they were fellow Egyptians, and they were real to them versus having somebody in a uniform. And so they stopped back down. We had two gates. We had a lot of newsmen and newswomen in the hotel. And I said, why or how did you get this to happen? He said, we didn't have to ask. We said, we want, and everybody came. And I said, why? We've been working for Marriott a long time. We believe in Marriott. You have taken our families in, which we had to protect the hotel, and the customers are our responsibility. So that was one of the incidents, but it was done by the entire executive committee, not done by one leader. And the chef gets credit for the idea. But it was an example that we went through the evacuation of Libya. We've been through all of those. And again, we had to get this team to always be involved in talking to the people. I'm not sure we were as well trained and effective as you were because you had done it in the military, but it was, in my mind, a responsibility we had for our employees and guests if we had trouble.
And I guess that looking after your people like that, then that in turn looks after their well-being and their mental well-being, and they'll go the extra mile for the company because
And
you've looked after
it,
them, they'll look after you, and I guess that
right,
in itself is a really good way of getting the the workers working as a team
right.
for each
So
other.
we had all these experiences, and we created a crisis committee, uh, really got ourselves trained, went through several training programs, even had an incident in Lebanon happen while we were in the middle of our training program and just stopped the training and moved to the issue. And those gave me an opportunity to write and think about when I was retiring from Marriott at 40 years because I'd done international president for 22 years of my 40. That's a long time for that assignment, but I loved every minute of it because we were going to new countries every day. And we had not been in these countries and we had to understand the cultures and all the rules, which are so different that you can't apply our Anglo Saxon, English American traditions to these countries. You had to understand them.
Yeah.
And so, with that in mind, I wrote a business book, which I'm not peddling now. It's pretty well sold out, but it was called You Can't Lead with Your Feet on the Desk, which talked about the fact that leadership is being there with the people, not sending memos from corporate office.
Yeah.
And
It it's in the title, isn't it? Lead. So you lead from the front. You don't push from the back.
it seems to really work with the leaders over history that did that. And
Yeah.
it was simply people forget. Uh, People don't really, I'm digressing a second, people don't really understand how people watch the leaders. Leader doesn't think they're watching them, but everybody is watching to see what that supervisor, the next level up, is doing to understand how it's going to affect them. And they have this continuous situation, and leadership sometimes just takes that for granted and takes that responsibility. Uh, so that book was printed in China and sold very well, and in Japan and in the US, and was available in the UK, and is still on Amazon today, even in the UK. But then I had another um, intersection with challenge. I developed leukemia, and this has been a 4-year war. And the after I got settled in the hospital, I called for the psychiatrist because I wanted somebody around me that understood what I was going through, that my wife couldn't, endeavor
Mm-hmm.
and handle well. And I'm going to make this a short story, but that's when I was started writing. Um, I had started already, and you met Gary Grossman earlier.
Yeah.
Uh, I started and we were working on this, but when I was in the hospital, I had plenty of time, and we came up with a solution for me, but it was literally 8 months in the hospital. Um, and um, I one day was walking with my wife down to a lounge which has a lot of sun and stuff. And I said, "Look, I can just close down and be gone, and it's going to be a lot easier for you than the next 2 years we're going to have to spend getting me fixed." She turned to me and said, "I did not marry a wimp." And at that point, I started PT the next day, and I've been working at it. But during that time, writing the book was one of my therapies. One of the companies kept me on their payroll, which gave me support. And this was kind of my closest, you know, in second attack of um, fear and not knowing, because the solution we came up with had a 50-50 chance. The other solution was I was gone
Mm.
after 14 months. And so I obviously took the 50-50, been successful. And that's where using the book has been tremendous therapy. And having Gary and I to work on it, primarily on the phone, or he'd come over the hospital. And so having something um, to keep your mind active. And during the process, I had 15 operations, and the uh, the book was a standing responsibility, and I needed to keep focused on responsibility. So, do I have some things up on the shelf? Yes. Did I choose at age 77, actually almost 78, to try to unpack all those? Not at this point, because quite frankly, I now know how to manage them from Dr. Lippincott's guidance. And you'll find that uh, the work you do in trying to stay alive then becomes your focus. But you've got to have these distractions or you'll never pull that off because I believe anybody with any disease can beat it based on attitude. It's in the mind that you've got to work with.
Having PMA works wonders, and that's positive mental attitude.
And so I am successful. I have gotten my bone marrow transplant. I was German. I'm now Italian because the donor was an Italian. And
Do you do a lot of this?
yeah, yeah,
A
I haven't
lot of talking
figured
like
out.
this.
I still have this thing. I can't pinch the ladies very well because the wife's there. So I'm stereotyping and becoming Italian. But she came up by, we don't know the guy's name. She came up, named him Enzo, and gave me a cap that says Enzo, full time.
Yeah,
Let me get this right, full time Italian. And so I also belong to a board, which is the FBI Foundation for the Academy. And so they sent it out and called it full bodied Italian. so, so it says FBI full bodied Italian. So you've also got to find that positive attitude. And people who really are cynical and don't feel and should deal with this when they're very young and don't have the confidence. Their families can do wonders by building the child's confidence and giving them a positive outlook to things, not just discipline, and be involved in their development. And that attitude can pay off beyond 70s and into 80s.
absolutely.
But I would like you to encourage your folks because the three books is called Red Hotel because it talked, the Red Hotel was the highest level of security we had in our hotels. It was something we put together with our crisis plan. The next book is Red Deception, and the Red Chaos book is in its sixth printing over here. But
Wow.
I am told that Amazon UK, you can get them too. And I know you're never bored with all your shows and productions, but we also, and I think it's on Amazon in the UK, have the audio versions of all three.
I
So
love
if
audio
you
books.
take a little time out and everything, that helps. Thank
Well,
you for letting me plug the book.
what I'll do
Oh,
is
wait,
I'll put the description of the books in the description. I'll put the links in the description where people can find them and stuff like that.
That'd be great. Gary and I are on the last 3 weeks of finishing Red Ultimatum and
Oh,
already moving ahead. I need to make one statement of disclosure. None of the women in the book that the character is my wife, and, and none of the names can be used of real girls that I ran across. So the wife has made that extremely clear, but that's the only requirement she put on the book.
brilliant. Well, Ed, it's been a fascinating chat. Really, really has. I thank you so much for sharing.
Well, Tim, it's been a pleasure. Talking about things like this reinforce the positives, and I appreciate you for taking the time to hear my stories. So, thank you very much.
That's been brilliant. Well, there you go. Another fascinating chat. So, if you want to get the books, they're on Audible books as well. So, yes, all that'll be down in the descriptions. So, until next time, TTFN. Ta ta for now.